Hi, welcome to Read 508. This week we are in Unit 3, Week 5. I think I forgot to note that last week that we actually finished up Unit 2 with our discussion of assessment, and we moved into Unit 3 with our discussion of early readers. So last week you read and listened to the screencast on emergent literacy and talked about really early and pre-literacy skills. And so this week we're going to move into Chapter 5 and discuss word recognition strategies. If later in this screencast you hear us referring to, because Dr. Bowers does one of the screencasts, if you hear her referring to Chapter 4, it's because, remember, the book changed. This is a new edition, and so they like to kind of keep us on our toes by doing things like reordering the chapter numbers, right? So this used to be Chapter 4 in the row text. It's now Chapter 5. So let's, before we talk about this week's topic, which is word recognition strategies, I wanted to visit our forum from Week 4 and talk about some of the comments that I heard on the forum. So if you remember, I had asked you what I considered a fairly provocative question, because it's a question that's been debated back and forth in the reading world for at least the last 30 to 40 years actively, and was at one point the height of contention here in California when it came to writing our standards and deciding the ways in which you best teach reading. You'll learn, if you've been in the classroom, you know this, that usually what the best way to teach reading is really the central question and has been in many school reform efforts. It's really all about what we do, right? Really all about how to get kids to read effectively, to be successful readers, because obviously it's the foundation for all of the other academic tasks they need to undertake. And so literacy and reading is always the focus. So there are different ideas out there on how you teach reading, as implied in my question. The two obviously most well-known camps would be those who support systematic, explicit teaching of subskills, in particular of phonics, and those who prefer or subscribe to the more whole language approach. So I'm not really going to get into all of that. Your text will touch on it a little bit, and we will touch on it a tiny bit this semester, but Read 536 is really where we tackle that issue. We spend 2 weeks solely focused on what we call the reading wars. If you've been teaching probably since for just only about the past 10 years, you might not know what we're talking about in terms of the reading wars, because there were, quote unquote, if you could see me now, my fingers are doing air quotes, kind of put to rest with the report of the national, the report of the National Reading Panel. But you'll get to all of that in your program, right? We're just in the beginning here. So, but I did want to pull out a few highlights. And so the first was, I asked you to kind of discuss which camp you subscribe to. So one in which reading and writing is learned, as I think Karen had put it, more organically, right? Or one that requires systematic and explicit instruction. And so quite a few of you turned to the videos that you saw. So you talked about Piaget's video and the Vygotsky video. And I think this quote right here is a great example of what some of you were thinking. So Vygotsky's ideas seem to reflect that learning has both spontaneous elements, or organic, where the child learns much from general social experiences and their environment, and scientific, with more structured classroom learning. So I think that is an accurate assessment of what Vygotsky would tell us in terms of his approach and his philosophy to learning. He did believe in a combination of both, and that both work together in concert. This was another statement that was found in many of your posts, and I believe that they need a supportive environment, a wide variety of experiences, and explicit instruction. And so that's echoed as well in this next quote, which is, through a series of exposure, experience, and with both a supportive environment and explicit instruction, I believe that children can learn to read and write most effectively. So what I really got from the post that I went through, for those of you that had already posted by the time I did this, is that you really thought you couldn't subscribe to either camp exclusively, and that it was a combination. And in fact, as we will discuss in this and many other classes, you are right on the money, right? So there really is no best one. There are one way to teach reading. There are many factors about learners that you need to consider, and about environment that you need to consider, and about who receives explicit instruction, when to deliver explicit instruction, and how to deliver explicit instruction. So all of those are very important factors when you talk about the best ways to teach reading. So a couple of more ideas. Children who have gaps in their phonemic awareness or the ability to hear and manipulate sounds benefit greatly from direct instruction in segmenting, blending phonemes, identifying similar and distinct sounds, and identifying rhymes. And that would be a quote that is supported by the research, right? So really, whether you come from a more whole language approach or a more systematic explicit instruction approach, that would be a statement that is both supported by the research and should be supported by both camps. Because remember, it's not that whole language doesn't say that we should never teach these, but kind of what they say is this shouldn't be the approach that we use for everybody, and shouldn't be the way that we first teach reading. So a really effective whole language teacher would, through providing students a variety of experiences with language, let's say at this very early level, would be able to identify students that were struggling and would give them some explicit instruction to try to remedy some of the reading, areas of reading or deficiencies that they were already displaying. So it's not that they would never address them. It's that they would. But as we know, in practice, sometimes all those pieces don't come out. And again, that's a discussion for 536, so I'm not going to get into that. Phonics instruction must be explicitly taught, even for whole language learners. Again, somebody who knows whole language really well, I think, would agree with that, with kind of the caveat of when necessary, right? So not every student needs explicit phonics instruction, but certainly there do exist those students who would need that, and then that would be provided in an appropriate manner. I want to save that one for 1 second. And actually, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about the report of the National Reading Panel. But in general, overall, the research that has been reviewed does support the idea that most students benefit from explicit systematic instruction in phonics, which is why you're going to find it in most programs, and you're certainly going to find it in any program that is subsidized by any type of federal dollars. So the last quote is, "I remember using lessons making words with my struggling students. It helped them to see each letter phonetically and see patterns in word families." And the reason that I chose this quote is because that is an activity that we are going to talk about in just a minute. So let's talk about word recognition strategies, right? So if you are hearing the term word recognition strategies, kind of you're probably familiar with the term, but depending on what you teach, this term may mean something different slightly. So if you teach the primary grades, you're probably thinking of phonics, and if you're teaching and decoding, and if you're teaching older students, you're likely associating this term with the term word recognition strategies with vocabulary or use of context clues or morphemic analysis. But regardless of that association that you made initially with the term word recognition strategies, those are all correct, right? So these are all word recognition strategies. It just, the way that you apply them changes. So we're going to talk about a variety of word recognition strategies in this piece. So we're going to start off with a little game, right? And this is the game Making Words or Make the Big Word that last quote that I pulled out was referring to. So this is a game that you can do with students. Sorry, I hit pause by accident. So this is a game that you could do with students, right? And essentially the idea is that this actually makes one big word, right? So you're trying to get students to make a variety of words out of this. And so the words they're not in order in this set of letters, but that you could take the letters, you can combine them into smaller pieces, and you can make several words. So why don't you go ahead and do that, right? This is a great practice for structural analysis and for getting students to understand parts within words and to being able to identify parts within a larger word. So, depending on the age of the student that you were playing this game with would depend on how you would play it. So if you were playing this with very young children, obviously you wouldn't be telling them to put these all together to make one big word. But what you could do is you could give this to them and you say, okay, you're going to come up with all of the 2-letter and 3-letter words that you could make out of these letters, and you could do it as a competition, or you could have them do it just individually, as teams. There's a variety of ways that you could do this, but really you would just be having them make lists of 2-letter and 3-letter words that they could make out of the letters that were given. So why don't you do that? So take a piece of scratch paper and go ahead and make yourself a chart, and on that chart make a column. So make a column for 1-letter words, 2-letter words, 3-letter words, 4-letter words, 5-letter words. I think you can go all the way up to 9 with this. You could do 6-letter, 7-letter, 8-letter, and 9-letter words, and then see if you can come up with the one big word. So I would encourage you to try this. So to make that little chart on a piece of paper right now, and to put this on pause, and see, give yourself a couple of minutes and see first how many words you could make. Another thing you could do to kind of help that along with students or with yourself would be to give them parameters, right? So you could then tell them to take the words that they make and sort for in, sort for ibble. So I'm kind of giving you some hints as to the type of words you could make. Search for words that with ER and EST, words with IDE, words that have ENSE at the end, ends. So, and then of course at the end you're trying to figure out what the big word is. So go ahead and put it on pause and see if you can do this yourself. Alright, so hopefully you did put it on pause and you played this little game for a couple of minutes. And these might be some of the words that you found. So obviously there's just one-letter word, and that would be I. 2-letter words, you could find in, its, is, be. 3-letter bet, set, let, bin, sin, tin. So you see here how you start to find patterns of words, right? So once you found bin, you could say to yourself, oh, I bet you there's more words that have IN in them. And then you find sin and you find tin. You probably did the same thing with bun, and then you realized it didn't work with anything else, right? So 4-letter words, tent, lent, bent, bunt, ride, bide, test, rest. So kind of a fun game, right? I didn't find any 6 or 7-letter words or 9, but I did find instruct. And then of course, if you put all of those together, you get the word indestructible. So I put on here a resource for you by the author of Your Phonics from A to Z text, Wiley Blevins. He has his own website, and he's got his own version of the big words strategy. So it's a fun game. It's a good way to practice morphemic analysis. It's something that you could do with your tutoring student. That might be a fun activity. And I've also included here some other resources. The interesting thing is that when I first pulled these resources up a couple of years ago for this class, the books existed. Now you can go online, and even just from when we did this class, I made this PowerPoint, 3 years ago the first time. A lot more of the stuff is just available online. So of course, if you're the type of person that likes to have the actual books and wants to make the copies, you can always buy these resources, but you can also go online now and you can find a lot of this stuff without purchasing the entire resource. But making words and making big words are takes on that particular strategy by Patricia Cunningham. They have a lot of games in them for structural analysis, for students at the early level and students at the older level, sorting games. But I thought that I would just kind of start off this PowerPoint with a fun little activity, because you are getting ready for your tutoring sessions, and so that's something that you should be thinking about, is as you go out there and you work with the students, what is that fun little activity that's related to what you're going to work on with them, but that's really going to kind of motivate them and just be something fun to do to start off. So we will pick up on the next screencast, and don't get freaked out that the voice is going to change, because Dr. Bowers is doing the next one. All right.